Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athlete trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase it all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. For our story episode this week, we're going to be continuing with the positivity and the good news with talking about our best comebacks, part 2.
Best comebacks, not as in someone said something and you had a really good comeback.
It's the witty episode today.
Oh my goodness. I am not ready for that. It's way too early for that.
No, we were talking about those best athlete comebacks from coming back from injury, those long rehabs, basically the most satisfying part of the job.
Yeah, I was going to say like the easiest part, because I feel like our jobs are so up and down.
True. Yeah.
It's definitely the up part of our job.
It definitely is the up part.
So we do have a continuation of last story episode, which was 2 weeks ago, talking about different ways that athletes have come back from injury and how that's been celebrated. Mm-hmm. So we are going to start with that. However, this episode, we're also going a little bit more into the specifics of like what favorite injuries people have to watch and come back from rather than just in general. Also, we go a little bit more on the more serious side and talk about how if you've ever had to tell an athlete that they can't play for the rest of their season. And we talk about how to have that conversation. And then also what to do when you have an athlete who isn't going to come back to sport, because that happens too.
Yeah, for sure.
So I feel like we have a good broad amount of stories for this episode.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So we're just going to get started with a storybook experience from an anonymous listener. Storybook AT experience, really. Senior star quarterback sprained his ankle toward the end of season in a game. I worked really hard with him through the week, doing aquatic therapy and progressing to land. He played the whole game the next week, and we won, and he did give credit to me. Just watching him to be able to play and be successful was certainly one of my greatest successes as an athlete.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Isn't it cool when you're like, man, like this person just isn't, like they aren't ready yet, but then you're like, maybe if we just do like this type of rehab or we do this type of treatment. And actually that's what I was trying to get to on some of the story prompts too, is like for example, I had someone who was having some hamstring pain, like distal hamstring pain. And this was like years ago, and a softball player. And she was working with a couple different athletic trainers, and it would just like really start bugging her in the middle of the game, and she just really couldn't get past we would do treatment and it would last her for probably like half a game, and then it just wouldn't really get beyond that. But this one time I was like, you know what, we're going to stop doing what we've been doing, and let's just like think outside the box. What else can attach in kind of that area, and like what else is there that we can kind of attack it with? And I started working on her calves. And as soon as I started working on her calves, boom, that was the answer.
Game changer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
And I remember like how excited she was. I remember her running around like right outside of the, we have a little satellite ATR right outside of there. We have like this asphalt. She was like running around there, and she was like, look, I can run, like all this stuff.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
It was really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've had, we had, for one of my women's soccer teams, we had one of our forwards who hurt her hamstring like later in the season, and it was getting close to conference tournament time. So just going through the management of like, hey, like we kind of need her. So trying to be able to balance those games where like, hey, maybe coach didn't need her as much, so we can have her for the more important games. So that was a fun one to deal with for sure.
Right.
But she definitely ended up playing. I believe she was playing in our conference final. So made it happen.
That's awesome. You want to read this next one from Emily G?
This one's by Emily G. I had a butterfly swimmer out 8+ months for shoulder ligament tightening surgery. Throughout the recovery, she did 2 days a week with a PT and 3 days a week with me. Came back to swim for her senior night. I shed a tear. She shed a tear. Said if it weren't for me, she wouldn't have been there. Great moment and one of my first post-op patients. This year, I had a basketball athlete out for an MCL sprain. Immediately when it happened, he was asking if I thought he'd be back in time to play in a specific basketball tournament. He told me it was his dream to play in since he was a kid. It was a huge national event on TV, Basketball Hall of Fame. We were only 7 weeks out from the event. Me and the strength coach at the school helped this kid do everything possible to get back. And he did. Came into the game and hit 2 threes back to back. I literally tried to stay chill on the bench, but I was screaming and clapping because I was so happy for him. His dream came true and he worked every second for it. That's crazy. That's so cool.
I think we did talk about in another episode, like being an athletic trainer who is like silent on the sidelines or who's not. You know, it's just personal preference, obviously, but that's so cool. I know. Definitely memorable.
Especially when you hit back-to-back threes.
Oh my goodness. This next one, we have 2 stories. This one is anonymous. So I have 2 athletes comeback stories that I wanted to share with you guys. I'll start with the first one. I had a football lineman a couple years ago hurt his back during his junior season. We started working on rehab because it was kind of an insidious onset. There wasn't a moment where something happened. He just started to feel lower back pain over time. So we worked on rehab for a couple weeks, and then there was no real improvement in his symptoms. I had him go see a doctor to figure out if there's anything extra going on. Turns out he had fractured his L4 and L5 vertebrae, and that's where the pain was coming from. So he missed all of spring ball and most of summer and half of his senior varsity season doing rehab, recovering from back surgery, and generally trying to work his way back onto the field. His surgeon was hesitant to clear him for any football activities. I wonder if it was more like a, not a compression, but like a, I don't know, with both vertebrae.
I know, seriously.
Like an overuse. I don't know what that would be. Crazy.
Oh, for linemen, they have a big susceptibility to spondies.
Oh, right.
Maybe spondylolisthesis. At 2 levels?
Well, I was going to say at 2 levels. Is that something?
I don't know.
We need to get our back surgery back on. But he continued to work hard, show up every day, and be dedicated to his rehab. And he was able to demonstrate to his surgeon the level of strength that we had developed throughout his rehab program. We finally got the okay from surgeon for him to be cleared to play on his senior night. And that was a very rewarding moment to see him and take the field for the first time in almost more than a year.
Wow, that's crazy.
And for him to go out there and be successful was amazing to see. After the game, he sat on the field and cried. And I went and I sat with him and I cried as well and told him that I was proud of him for all the work that he did. And it was a great moment for the both of us. He has since come back to thank me again after he graduated and is doing great in his job now. He always wanted to be a mechanic for classic cars, and he's working on the path doing that pain-free.
That's cool. Isn't
awesome. That really cool?
Yeah, then that's the key word right there, pain-free.
I know what the answer is going to be for this because you don't really cry, but have you ever cried with an athlete?
No.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I've heard of athletic trainers who have, and just like it just shows you the relationship that they've had with those athletes and just like the empathy that is shared within that and the relationship that's built and the rapport, and it's definitely surreal, I bet.
Oh, 100%. For sure. I mean, you're sharing the same journey as they are pretty much. I mean, outside of them experiencing the setback and like the pain. Right. But you're with them on that journey. So
The second story that I have is about another football player who was one of our slot receivers who dislocated his shoulder during a game. And during his game his sophomore year, and then was not recommended surgery or anything like that by the doctors. After that football season, and over the course of like 2 or 3 months, he subluxed or dislocated his shoulder 3 or 4 more times, doing various activities like snowboarding or just playing football in the backyard or whatever. So I had told him that it would be a good idea to go see a doctor again and see if surgery was going to be recommended at this point. He did that, and the surgery was recommended, and he planned to have the surgery early enough so that he could be done with his rehab process before junior season started. All of that seemed to be going well, and we were on the same page with the surgeon that he had done the surgery early enough in the year to be able to not miss very much, if any time, at all during his junior season. As we got closer and closer to season start, he did his check-ins with the surgeon, even though he was showing really great progress, range of motion-wise, strength-wise, and all those general markers that we look for in the rehab. The surgeon was still hesitant to let him do any football practice or drills. We did 2 check-ins that went exactly the same way, where he described the surgeon coming in, not listening to any of his concerns at one point. We had filmed videos of him doing his rehab exercises, even going as far as like throwing a football at him and showing that he could catch and do things like that. But the surgeon had no interest in any of those things and just kept telling him that the clearance date wouldn't be until November, which was a week after our regular season ends.
Oh, man.
This would have effectively kept him out for all of his junior season, even though he had done his work up front to try and have the surgery at a time where he would be able to return. And had been the perfect rehab patient, hitting all of his markers, doing all of his exercises. I offered to him and his parents that they could come see our team doctor, who is an orthopedic surgeon, and get a second opinion and see what he says about the situation. So we were able to set up an appointment with our team doc, and he did take a look at him and confirm my thoughts, which was that he was looking great and his range of motion was great and his strength was great and he had no concerns about the surgery failing, even if he were to play football. That was great news for the player and his family. They were all excited about the prospect of him being able to play. The caveat was that we had to continue working on rehab throughout the rest of the season, and that he had to check in with me every single day to make sure there were things that were still on the right track. He was finally able to get back into practice and work his way back onto the playing squad. And in his first game back on the field, caught a pass across the middle, put the Jets, and scored a touchdown late in the game that helped seal the victory for us. In that moment, everyone was super excited and jumping around, and I was so happy to see him be successful out on the field again. But the moment that was really special to me was during his celebration. He ran up to me, and this athlete is not on the tall side. So I was able to point up in the air as he was running at me, and he knew that he came and jumped, and I lifted him by his shoulder pads and held him in front of the crowd while everyone was cheering for him. It's funny too, because the sideline camera captured that moment on Huddle, and you can see just how excited everybody was. But overall, those were very 2 special athletes and athlete comeback stories that have happened to me recently.
Oh my gosh, that's really cool.
Isn't it? It is really cool.
Wow, what a turn of events.
I know. Also, so Randy and I have been talking about this and I guess it just also depends on your own, I guess your state organization bylaws, or like your league or your organization or whatever
your sponsoring sport body is, like NCAA or
like that, or like
that.
NAIA or we're both within the California Community College Athletic Association, so we have to go off the bylaws of those things. But as far as getting a second opinion and getting team doctors, we all know that our team doctors work with sports and that they are going to be more likely to let our athletes play. Because that they are aware of what athletic trainers are, they're comfortable with what our abilities are, rather than a random physician who doesn't want to extend their liability on that, which is totally understandable. But we have been talking off podcast about this and how the team doc does have a final say in a lot of situations. If not all situations. So just heads up, if you guys heard this and want to look into that, that's something that we've kind of been talking about. So.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's true. You don't want like some random healthcare professional who maybe not know that much about sports also go the opposite way and clear someone who our team doc would probably be like, yeah, this person shouldn't be cleared.
Right. As much as it would make the athlete happy.
Yes. Yes.
Do you have a favorite injury to rehab or favorite injury to watch return? I feel like I can't think of one off the top of my head.
I think now, like, I don't necessarily have like a favorite. I wouldn't be like, oh, this one's really cool to come back from. I mean, they're all cool to come back from, I think, but it used to be hamstring because
really?
Just because of track, like, it just how devastating of an injury that can be for a sprinter. I think that was always the most satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Because like a lot of athletes would think like, oh man, like my season's basically done. So being able to
Right.
kind of come back and get them back and compete at a high level, that was always fun.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what mine is. I feel like we have to talk about it a little bit more before off the top of my head.
Yeah.
We got one from Jenn B, and I really love this. She said that her favorite is the UCL.
Oh, okay.
And the reason why I love this is because I feel like most people don't think upper extremity when they're thinking about what's their favorite to like work with and rehab and watch return to play and everything.
Jenn B says, I feel like pitching takes more precision than standing, running, jumping, etc. Not discounting someone that's come back strong from that, of course. It's not easy, but for the most part, you're strengthening muscles that are meant to be big and strong. When you're rehabbing a UCL, you're working on perfecting the strength of small muscles that will be doing a pretty specific job, mostly speaking in terms of pitching at the moment. So it just seems like it's a bit bigger of a hurdle to get back to where you were before. Since pitching isn't really a natural movement and it requires specific strength of so many muscles from the back up around the shoulder and down the arm. I don't know, it just seems different to me. More fine motor rather than gross motor achievements. And if a pitcher doesn't come back 100%, he's essentially done because you can't really compensate for incorrect pitching mechanics or decreases in velocity or accuracy. So there's a bit more riding on that person coming back and doing well. Yeah, that's true.
So I was like thinking of this first, like it was the first thing that popped in my head, but I feel like I was trying to think of some examples, but I think I really like to see low back and SI joints return or rehab those.
Yeah.
Because that you can really make a big difference when you actually start incorporating like deep core, TA, pelvic floor, kind of stuff like that.
For sure.
Like hip flexor strength when they're like, no, my hip flexors are plenty strong. And you're like, actually, no, they're not.
No, they're not. They're really not.
But I feel like SI, I had a football player who had a pretty severe SI joint pain that he couldn't make it through warm-ups. And I feel like and he was not compliant with rehab, so that was fun.
Oh, super.
But you know what? The days that he was compliant with rehab and kind of like when he started to become compliant with rehab, you could really tell a difference.
Yeah.
And I think like just seeing the amount of change that a lot of times I feel like you do rehab exercises and you're like, I promise this is going to work. And like,
you will see a difference.
Right. But I feel like with SI, like you can really see the difference. Have you ever had to tell an athlete that they can't play for the rest of their season?
Yes.
Yeah. 92% of people said yes. The 8%, I said not yet, not no, because that's kind of a given.
Yeah. Because it will happen.
8% said not yet.
It will happen.
Yes.
It is not a fun conversation.
No, it's not. Some people take it better than other people, and I think part of it is the shock of it.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like you might get someone who's like take it, and then they go home and just like crash.
I think the hardest ones are the ones that are in denial.
Right.
Because then it kind of hits them like a ton of bricks. Like just the bad news.
Yeah, it's also, you'd never know who it's going to happen to, so you don't know if it's going to be your athlete that you have a really good rapport with or one of your athletes who you haven't seen as much. I had an athlete who I've shared before who tore his ACL and he didn't know what an ACL was. And so not only did I have to tell him what happened, but I also kind of had to break the heaviness of the news because I think that he just wasn't understanding fully. And it's definitely a fine balance because it's not like you want to go in and be like, hey dude, like this is like bad news, right? You don't want to put that in their head, but you do want to kind of like let them down easy and say, you know, like this is something that you're going to have to go see a surgeon. And if you are going to want to be active for the rest of life, you're probably going to want to repair this.
Yeah. And you don't want them to like be caught blindside in a way that like when they see the doctor and they're like, yeah, this is going to be like a year.
Right.
All right. So you want them to be prepared that, hey, this, you might hear this, like this is going to
Right.
be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
We also have some, and it depends on your setting too, and it
Yeah.
also depends on which doctors you're working with, but we do have some, I think later in the episode, we have a little bit of tips on how to have that conversation. I think right here, it's more about some tips. I have two stories about people who've done it, but
okay.
we do have tips at the end, and they do kind of vary depending on like setting.
Okay.
You want to read this one from Jenn B?
This one's by Jenn B. Let them know how much it sucks, and it will likely be hard. Make sure they know you'll be there with them every step of the way, and that they are more than capable of getting over this hurdle. The specifics are always tailored to that athlete and your relationship with them too.
Yeah, it really is.
Pretty much.
Especially if you have someone, I guess it kind of depends, like judgment call, because if you have someone who's in more denial, like sometimes they have to hear it from the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes they're not going to hear it from you,
Yeah.
and maybe that's not your place.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
And it's not about us. It's about how the athlete's going to move forward.
Yep, for sure.
Like we had an athlete who 3 athletic trainers told this person that they had likely torn their ACL, and they were like, but I'm fine. And it wasn't until we sent them to doc and then they saw the scans and then they're like, oh, okay.
Yep, I tore my ACL.
We got to do this.
Yep. The next one's by Savannah B. The first time I had to do it, I was nervous sick because it was a senior. Ooh, that is tough.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the mechanism of injury, and before I even went to special testing, had a pretty good idea it was season ending. The athlete was surprisingly okay. I think deep down they knew it too. The athlete's goal after that was just to get stronger before surgery and just get back to normal life. So yeah, I think that helps too, is having a goal in mind of what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I feel like it's a little hard to do when you're in that situation that like, oh man, I just tore my ACL, my year's done. But like the focus doesn't necessarily change on what you're doing. Like,
right.
Like, yes, you were focusing on perfecting my craft of whatever sport and like practice. Well, now the mindset has to shift to, okay, now we focus on rehab.
Right.
I need to focus on just getting everything prepped for surgery. And then after the surgery, your focus has to be the rehab after that. So like as an athlete, your focus doesn't necessarily go away. It just needs to change from like, okay, well, I was focusing so much on my actual sport to now you got to focus on doing the tools like it's your sport to get back to your sport.
Mm-hmm.
But that is hard in those situations for an athlete to kind of see that mindset shift.
Right. And sometimes it's hard for them to see full picture. Sometimes it's easier for them to take it piece by piece.
Yeah, for sure.
But sometimes it's opposite. Sometimes they're like, no, I want to see the end. I want to see the light at the end of the tunnel so I know what I'm working towards.
Yeah.
And kind of like what Jenn B was saying, like just it's about individualizing it for each athlete.
Oh, for sure.
Honestly, I think we can just go straight into the tips.
For the hard conversations?
Yep.
Perfect. So the first tip's by Mason B. Have an athlete who has seen 3 doctors and had a number of diagnostic tests, and we still have no clue what's going on. My go-to reframe is, we know another thing it isn't, and we can narrow our search, which that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Mason continues with, this is a right now setback, not a forever problem.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's true. That's true. You can at least identify it's not these things.
Right. That's my go-to. I feel like in the orthopedic world, there's a lot of things that are temporary, and I very much remind them that this is temporary and not permanent, and it's not something that defines them. Yeah. How much that falls on deaf ears, I am not sure, but I feel like the temporary aspect, like we have, and I also use like light at the end of the tunnel. I use that a lot. So don't lose that light. We're working towards this.
Yeah.
But I really like what Mason was saying with, it's another thing that it isn't.
Yeah.
Because it does narrow the search. And how often does this happen that we have multiple doctors who have differing opinions on what's happening?
Yeah, for sure.
And how often do we take that into consideration when we are beating ourselves up when we don't know what's going on?
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
We really should, because we can even take this for ourselves. We know another thing that it isn't.
Yeah. That's really true. And it kind of changes how you do your rehab too, because like, hey, now I know it's not these things, so like I might be able to be a little more aggressive,
right?
With certain exercises we do, because we know it's not these things, so it's not causing that damage. So as long as the patient feels okay, right, it might be all right.
I mean, same thing with you try cupping and it doesn't work for them. Well, there's another thing that doesn't work.
Hey,
so,
we know you don't like that.
Yeah. Therefore, we don't have to pick through 57 different treatment options. Yeah. We can pick through 56.
Yep. There you go.
Lynsey D says, give reassurance that they aren't alone and that they have a team. Be calm and consistent voice. I like the saying, this isn't a setback, it's just a set up for what's to come.
Man, that's a good one.
I know.
I really like that one.
I've never heard that before.
That's a good way of looking at it.
Not a setback, it's just a set up.
That's really cool.
I mean, you're always going to have things that pull you back. Well, okay, pull you back is maybe a bad way to say it.
You're going to have things that just don't go the way you're expecting them to.
Right. Just a setup.
Unfortunately, rehab in most cases is not a linear process.
That is my least favorite thing to hear.
Yes, unfortunately. We would all like it to be, right? You would all like it to be pretty linear and just, each day that gets by gets better and better, but that's not the reality all the time.
No, it isn't.
There are some bad days that kind of pop up.
Next one's by Savannah B. If you know that the injury is bad, example, ACL tear, but you need an MRI to confirm it, don't tell your athletes how bad it really is. Be honest, but don't let them assume the absolute worst just yet. When it's something like the ACL, I tell them, all the testing I did was for the ligaments in your knee. Your ACL felt loose, and with your MOI, that could be indicating that you've done damage to your ACL. We won't know how bad it is until we can see it on an MRI, so it could be a simple fraying of the ligament, or it could be fully torn. We'll cross that bridge once we know 100% what we are working with. Based on multiple conversations with athletes, they appreciate this because they know up front what we are thinking, but it still allows them to have hope that there's a chance that it's bad, but not something that can't be worked through.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I try to do that too. It's like, I don't have MRI eyes. I can only go off of what it feels like. And I just tell them the concern that I have when I feel like, hey, this just doesn't feel right to me. It feels loose.
And I think it depends. Like, I know that there are some physicians I've worked with who will say, hey, like, don't tell them if it's an ACE. Like, I want to tell them to, like, once it's confirmed.
Yeah.
There are also some physicians who are like, you are the first one there, so just, like, let them know what you're thinking, and then we'll confirm it in the office.
If they've seen the doctor, if we got the MRI results and I know before the student athlete knows or before their appointment, I try not to say anything. I try to let the doctor do that because they're going to go over the MRI too. Right. But like, I don't know, I just feel like that's a better place than me just getting a text with not a lot of context and just being like, oh, hey, so yeah, your MRI, your ACL is gone. Right. So yeah, usually if it's something like that, like you were saying, like if they've already seen the doctor and they've done the imaging, I'm just gonna wait until they have that follow up.
But I also feel like it depends on your athlete and depends
it's
on
true.
Because if you have a really good relationship with that athlete and maybe they're not as close with the physician, like maybe you take that into consideration. Yeah. I feel like there's so many things you can't really do a blanket statement on for these hard conversations.
For sure.
You kind of just have to do it a lot and figure out your own style. Yeah. I feel like I usually try to break down what's, like, let's say, I feel like the ACL is kind of the easiest to explain. But if we're talking about like, okay, so, you have ligaments in your knee, ligaments connect bone to bone, this one, whatever. And I try not to go like too anatomical because I feel like it loses them. Yeah. But if you simplify it enough so that they understand what it does and why that's not functioning, or maybe if they're saying like, oh, I feel unstable, this is why you feel unstable. Yeah. I usually set it up and I'm like, okay, like this is what I'm thinking, but
Yeah.
we also still have to see.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
That's why I don't have MRI eyes.
Right. What other I feel like ACL is the first one you think of when you think of like season ending. But I feel like what other common? I feel like other knee injuries can be season ending.
Pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on the sport. So like, again, a lot of my experience being cross and track, right? Telling someone they have a stress fracture.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that one's a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm. I've seen a stress fracture in baseball. In an arm.
I know you don't see that very often.
No.
The upper extremity stress fracture, but they do happen. I would say, yeah, the hamstring one too. That's kind of a big deal.
Mm-hmm. I feel like hamstring is sneaky. It's
It
like
is sneaky.
You don't expect it to be. You're like, oh, it's just a hamstring.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, like, it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
So yeah, I think those ones for me that I've had the most experience kind of telling someone, hey, this is probably what it means.
Right.
Trying to think if any other ones off the top of my head. No, those are just kind of the big ones. Those have been the bigger ones for me.
Concussions.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of long-term concussions, I feel like.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of concussions in general, not me personally, but my athletes. But I feel like, especially more recently, like in the last couple of years, I've had some that have been over 6 months.
Wow, that's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
And not necessarily over 6 months of not returning to any sort of activity, but definitely over 6 months of continued rehab and trying to get some of their symptoms down.
Yeah.
And not just one sport. I mean, obviously a lot from football, but
of course.
I've seen a couple in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
We had some just other sports, but kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's really crazy.
Actually, I feel like lacrosse has a lot of concussions.
I think I've only lacrosse does.
Women's lacrosse.
I think I've only had one long-term concussion.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can think of at least 5.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And those are just the ones coming to the top of my head right now.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I've only had one.
Wow. That's good.
Cross country athlete.
That's also nuts because you don't think of cross country and concussions as...
Nope. But you do think of if there's any going to be weird injuries, it's going to happen to cross and track. It happened in the weight room. They were goofing around.
You know what we need to bring back is the episode that we did on bizarre mechanisms of injury. How did people get hurt?
Yeah, we should bring that.
We should do that soon.
Nice little refresher.
I know. So the next thing, this is the last thing that I asked, was have you ever had an athlete who got injured and then did not return to sport? And I was expecting this to be high, but I wasn't expecting it to be 80% high.
Yeah, that's true.
80% of people said on our poll said that they have had an athlete who got injured and did not return to sport.
I wonder if how much of that too was just maybe the athlete didn't want to anymore.
Right.
Like not necessarily that, hey, they just could not.
Right.
They just like, hey, you know what? I just don't want to go through this again. Or, you know, I don't need to compete at like a super competitive level. I just rather just kind of just play for fun or whatever.
I've had an athlete who was medically disqualified. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
We had multiple conversations with multiple physicians, and then we were kind of okay with it, and okay, all done. Then all of a sudden, he wanted to play again, so we had to go through the whole process of. That's something that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Especially seeing he had an emergency scenario that we had to deal with. So I think I was surprised that he was willing to go through sport again after he had already gone through a 911.
Yeah. Yeah. I had one with the concussion that we were talking about, the long-term one. That one, he eventually stopped running.
Okay.
And then I had a back neurological symptoms in her leg.
I feel like you've had a lot of those.
Yeah. And didn't get better with rehab. The best part was MRI was clean.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't see anything on the MRI. So more rehab, but that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Almost nothing would work for this poor girl. I think the only thing that kind of worked was acupuncture.
Oh, I love acupuncture.
Yeah. So, but she eventually was kind of medically disqualified.
Dang.
Yeah.
So we have Kevin J. Oh, we need a name for Kevin.
We do. We've been thinking of what kind of nickname we can give him.
We got a cool one from Kevin.
I'm down with that. A cool one from Kevin.
Okay. So Kevin J said, I had a wrestler with multiple concussions. I was at a high-level academic and military school, and his career was going to suffer if he didn't stop. I talked to the head AT, she spoke with Doc and myself, then we brought the head coach in. After all that was done, we brought in the athlete and sat him down. He understood it but wasn't happy about it. He wanted to call his dad and have him be a part of the conversation. So on a side note, I'm going to stop this real quick. I feel like this is kind of a more recent observation.
Okay.
Like, I feel like athletic trainers are so, and this is a blanket statement, not everyone. Athletic trainers are so hurt when the athlete doesn't update them on certain things that they're going through or stuff like that. Like, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? You might not be part of their support system.
Yeah.
You want to be part of their support system, and you hope to be part of their support system, but that might not be the reality of it.
Yeah, that's true.
So the fact that these athletic trainers allowed the kid to call his dad, who is part of his support system, that right there tells me that they are looking out for the athlete rather than themselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's true.
And it's hard when you're in the middle of it, but I think it really does make a big difference.
Yeah.
It's not about us.
Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, Kevin continues. On the upside, his dad was a veteran and he had a TBI from his time in the military and helped me with that conversation. We put dad on speakerphone. It was 2000, so FaceTime was in the future. And he explained that he agreed with our decision and would support the staff and help his son get through it as well. We were on the East Coast and he was from a Western state, so the distance made it a little bit more difficult. Some tips. You have to go in calm. At no point can you get territorial. Make sure you have cleared it with all necessary parties and that you have support for your decision. I was lucky that I didn't need to lean on them, but once a decision is made, everyone needs to stick to their guns.
Yes.
There's nothing worse than an unorganized and not on the same page staff.
Yes. That is terrible, especially when you're like dealing with situations like these.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is such a sensitive situation that you need to all be on the same page. Because the minute someone says something different, it's kind of like, oh, well, this person thinks that.
And they're going to hold on to that.
Oh, yeah.
There's also a statistic that I hold on to a lot. And I wish I could fact check this because I don't remember where it came. Well, I think it came from a presentation from a physician. But I believe it is that patients only gather at most around 50% of what the physician says.
I knew it was going to be that one.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. So when I'm explaining something to someone, first of all, I try not to explain a ton of stuff because otherwise they're not going to remember it. And I try to simplify it so that if whatever they do take, they can hopefully take back the parts that they understand,
Yeah.
But knowing that they're going to walk out, think of how many times, like even us who, like, for example, like I just went to the dermatologist and he was talking about like a mole to be removed on my knee, for example. And I am very well like aware of the things that he was talking about. And still I walked out and was like, oh shoot, like I don't even remember him, like Randy said something like, oh, he said it was just going to be this. And I remember thinking like, I don't even remember him saying those words. So like even us who are more,
Yeah.
our ears are more ready to hear.
Yeah.
Kind of like physician speak or physician jargon. Just think of that next time, like you go to the doctor and you walk out and you're like, oh, well, I'm trying to remember that conversation.
What the hell
Like imagine an athlete who
hasn't
literally has no idea.
Oh man, dude, I've had an athlete like that who asked him like what his surgery was because it was an incoming athlete,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't know. I just sat there like, you just like had them cut into you, and you just like, yeah, I don't know.
That's another level of trust.
Yeah, I'm like, wait, what? So
like this had to be done.
So yes, this athlete going to the doctor requires someone needs to be there. Someone needs to be there to relay, because there has been a situation where he told me one thing and then I got the news from the actual doctor and I said, wow, that is way off from what I was told. So I appreciate this.
Because of that situation, I have had physicians request that an athletic trainer's at their doctor's appointment.
It does make it nice.
It does.
That is one thing I do miss, being at the doc visits.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was nice to be in the same room, especially for the athlete standpoint, because I had this happen all the time. The athlete wasn't happy about something, whether it was like, hey, maybe the med they were on, right, it wasn't reacting well for them, or like, hey, like they still kind of have this kind of concern. We get in the room, and by the way, our team docs have been great, not like intimidating and all or anything like that, right? So very approachable. Get in the room, the doctor will be like, okay, so what's going on? How's everything going? Oh, well, everything's good. And I'd be like,
squeaky wheel, squeaky wheel, squeaky wheel.
Yeah. I'd be like, oh, well, weren't you saying that like, hey, this med's making you feel like this? Or like, hey, didn't you say like this kind of was your concern? And they'd be like, oh yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh.
It helps when you have someone there.
It does. It really does.
Because as soon as you get there, you're like, I don't remember.
Nope,
Everything's okay.
I feel great.
Yeah.
I feel 100%. Yeah, I'm never going to forget those ones. Those ones were funny. Those ones were funny.
Have you ever had a physician come in and talk to an athlete about I should preface this because I feel like you've had some physicians who just kind of would... their bedside manners just very much like just shut it down. And
have you thought about quitting? But you know what's funny? So, speaking of that, is that like that doctor in particular that we're kind of talking about? At the end of the day, really cared about those kids. Like I would have to prep the athletes before they saw him, because some people would get rubbed the wrong way. So I'd have to prep them like, hey, this doctor is very confident in what he does, and he's very good at what he does. It's gonna come off as a little aggressive,
the intentions
a little arrogant, but honestly, he really cared about these student athletes. Like he would ask what they're doing, like what they're majoring in school. Like he really cared about like what they had going on in their lives. So sometimes the have you thought about quitting was a little more of a joke, but obviously some athletes don't like to hear that.
Oh, I didn't realize it was a joke, actually.
I don't think he was that serious. I mean, some of it is kind of true. Like, okay, we've done all these things and like you're still having issues. Okay, well, I mean,
let's amputate.
Your next stop is, well, maybe just not playing that sport anymore.
Right.
But yes, that was good. I remember that. Those are good times.
Okay, but for real though, have you ever had an athlete, like any athlete who has had to sit down and kind of like think about hanging up their cleats or whatever, not return to sport? Have you ever had to bring a physician in?
Not like that. Yeah, not like that. I mean, like I said, the one with the back. But I feel like that wasn't necessarily a conversation that we all had. That she was kind of... It started coming up because unfortunately, one thing that we had to consider was, I believe she was a scholarship athlete.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't, so from a team standpoint, if she isn't disqualified, all right, that's a scholarship lost to the team to use. So they still have to pay out that scholarship. If you medically disqualify her, the school will still pay that scholarship, but now the team gets that scholarship back, so they can use it for someone else.
Interesting.
So either way, the athlete's being taken care of.
Right.
That's the most important thing. So it's from a standpoint of, okay, how exactly do we want to manage this for the athlete, but also considering the pressure that the team's under, okay, of what exactly is this? Unfortunately, D1 athletics is also still somewhat of a business. So also being able to navigate that. So that did come up, and I can't remember exactly how we handled it, but it was kind of like a, I don't know, there wasn't like a big sit down. Like we didn't just have a big sit down of like, hey, here's what we're gonna do. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think I've had any other, because again, all my sports haven't been like again, most of them have been track. So it's like, it's not like you're not having the, hey, this is like your 5th concussion talk.
I feel like you say most of them haven't track, but I feel like you also haven't worked track in like
yeah,
three.
Yeah, that's true. It has been a long time.
Years.
But I've never
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, it has been a while. But like, I'm not in like an intensive like impact like collision sports, right? Like, so I'm not having the, hey, this is your 5th concussion talk.
Right.
You know, like,
right.
Yeah, the potential's there for when I was working soccer, and I have basketball now, but I just haven't had that yet.
I feel like I'm gonna like, we're gonna end this, and then I'm gonna be like, dang it, I forgot about. I did have a performer who was having severe mental health like triggers when they got to the theater. And so I wasn't part of that conversation, but I know that they had to have a conversation about the like mitigating that. I don't know whatever happened to that person.
Yeah, the only time I can think of is maybe just sometimes the athlete, like, hey, like this is their 3rd ACL tear. Do I really want to go through this again? Kind of conversation. But I don't know. It never really got to. Yeah, I don't know. We never had like a big sit down and like stuff like that.
But I also feel like most of the time it's not going to be a big sit down. It's either going to be they're going to sit down in the office, or you're going to sit down in your office, or it's not going to be like all 3 of you.
Yeah.
I think the only time that I've really had that was with this emergency situation. But that was also a multiple concussion and a neck involvement. So, and it was football. So it was just, there was a lot going on. But I think that most of the time it's going to be more like either coming from your physician or talking to you. Or honestly, I feel like most of the time when it's time, like the athlete will kind of.
Yeah, I feel like the athletes kind of know.
Yeah.
If anything, they kind of know.
You know, when you have to have this conversation, it really actually is a hard conversation because the athlete's most of the time not going to be like, yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes deep down, they kind of know, like, it probably is time.
They just don't want to hear it.
Yeah, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah. Well, especially like I've had one of the long-term concussions was created a lot of anger, and so like anger management, which made conversations a little bit tougher because obviously their fuse was a little short, so kind of navigating that.
I actually did remind me, speaking of like the athletes kind of knowing, I had a pole vaulter like senior year too, and she had a pretty extensive knee surgery history, like with like meniscus stuff, and like she was having some problems at the like during the off season, like right like in the fall going into like the winter, and we were like, yeah, you know, you should probably see your surgeon again, because she was going back home, and when she saw her surgeon again, you know, they did the imaging and stuff, and they hit her with, so you basically have like 60-year-old knees.
Great. Love that.
Yep. And they told her if she were to keep going, she would need a total knee replacement before she was the age of 30.
Ouch.
And this athlete wanted to be a surgical PA. So she's gonna.
Oh wow! On her feet.
And she's gonna be on her feet, right,
Mhm.
for long periods of time, moving
Mhm.
around.
Mhm.
So she just decided, hey, you know what? Like, I'm done. Like, I don't need to do this. And I get it, right? Like, because more than likely she's gonna need to have 2, maybe 3 knee replacements in her
Oof.
lifetime because of just how young she is.
Right.
You know, so that's crazy.
It is.
So I think in those situations, right, the athlete kind of knew, like, hey,
Right.
like, this is, like, it would be nice to finish my senior year, but also, like, I have more, like, valuable things in my life that I don't want to miss out on.
And that's the thing. I think we talked about it last episode too, but like us as athletic trainers, part of our job is to look for the athlete's well-being outside of sport and beyond what they're doing now.
Yeah.
Which is really hard in the moment. The athlete's like, I don't care.
Yeah. I just want to play.
Yeah. Can you share actually a little bit more of that process, what it's like to have a conversation with an athlete who you have had to disqualify for a stress fracture?
I mean, it's basically kind of like your ACL one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because to them, it's basically like an ACL injury. Like,
Mm-hmm.
granted, you're not out a year, but you miss your year. And depending on the significance, like, you're going to be out a few months.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be away from running. So a lot of times it is that kind of like similar conversation as you would if you're suspecting an ACL. Obviously, the clinical exam's a little bit different. Like, I don't have necessarily a great, there's not a lot of great special tests for stress fracture. So like you can't say like, oh yeah, this feels loose, so I don't. Like,
right.
I'm worried about this, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times you have to go off of, like, because, like, I really like the fulcrum test. So a lot of times, hey, I'll do this. And, like, just how they describe their pain, or just let them know, like, hey, because of pain with this and just how it's been described, I am a little bit worried that, hey, we might be looking at, like, a bone issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I would refer them, and they'd be like, okay. Right. And then once they kind of get that imaging done, it kind of hits them right around there that, oh yeah, there is like stress reaction, stress fracture. So it is kind of like similar to the ACL conversation. There's you don't necessarily have a lot of definitive things to say, like, oh, I don't like the feel of, oh, this feels loose, or a lot of times it's just like, hey, I just don't like the way it's described. When I do this, it kind of hurts you, or it could kind of hint at that. So yeah.
Lastly, I feel like we've had, and I've shared this before, but I am still wondering if other people have had such a high incidence of Achilles tendinopathy and Achilles ruptures as I have seen. I feel like in this last season, I know the NFL is kind of...
The NFL had a few this year.
Yeah, well, I think that they had like over 20, but I think that's normal for them, like 18 to...
I think what made it seem big this year is there were a few big names.
Big names, right.
That got it.
Right. But I feel like I haven't seen that much
Yeah.
At our level.
Yeah.
But suddenly I feel like Achilles tendinopathy was probably my number one injury this past season.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That sucks.
Mm-hmm.
That sucks.
Mm-hmm. And soft tissue too. Like, you wouldn't think that of... And it wasn't just one position group. It was probably like 1 or 2 people from each position group.
Oh, interesting.
Right? And then you think, okay, well, what are they all doing that's the same?
That's doing this.
I was working with my strength coach to try to figure this out so much. It was befuddling.
Yeah.
Both of us.
What a word.
I'm telling you, that's an understatement.
That's fine.
So anyway, do you have anything more on a comeback story? Or a lack of a comeback story, I guess, at the end?
No, it is truly the best part of the job, is when they come back.
It is.
Like, that is really the coolest thing, to see them kind of do their sport and have fun with, being back. And yeah,
I feel like in 2 ways, when they come back to their sport and when they're all said and done, when they're on to new things and they come back to see you.
Yeah, that's always exciting.
A different kind of comeback.
Yeah, that's true. That is always fun when a former athlete comes back and says hi.
Mm-hmm.
That's fun.
Anyway, that's all we got for this episode. So next story episode, you know what? I think it's going to be National Athletic Training Month next time we
I think
record.
you're right.
We could bring back weird MOIs.
I think that'd be fun.
So anyway, keep posted. Stay tuned.
Keep on keeping on.
Yes. Carry on. Whatever you want to do until our next episode. We will have all of those story Instagram posts on our stories. So you can submit your stories. You can also go to our Facebook group, which I don't think I have updated what we're doing in the Facebook group lately, but check that out. And then if you guys are interested in CUs, we have some CU episodes, so check that out. There's some interesting new news with CUs going on, so stay tuned for that. I don't know when we're going to release that information, but I've never really been on this side of hey, stay tuned for this news stuff.
We're working on things.
We're working on things.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's all I got.
That's
you got
perfect.
Anything else?
Nope, that's perfect. Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.